in the balance because his disciples couldn't get it. They were seriously, spiritually obtuse. And Jesus had come to establish the new Israel and to establish the new kingdom and to revive Israel, and his disciples didn't know what was up. So Mark relentlessly exposes the failures of the disciples. Some have said Mark was mad at Peter, especially, and tried to humiliate him in his book. Not true. Well, the story starts positively enough. Jesus calls the disciples, they leave their nets. Without a moment's hesitation, they leave their family, they leave their wives, they leave their social network, they leave their jobs. They follow Jesus. They are loyal to him. But it very soon becomes apparent that simple devotion and simple loyalty to Jesus are not enough. You can say, "I love you, Jesus." But if you don't understand what he is all about, you have a serious problem. And they do not understand the mission of Jesus. They do not understand who he is. When he says to them, "I've got to die," they rebuke him. They say, "Why are you saying such stupid things? Messiah is not supposed to die." And time is running out. There is a new Israel to be established, and the tensions are rising. And the disciples do not have the slightest idea about who Jesus is and about who God is. So twice in the book of Mark, Jesus explicitly shows them who he is and what he's all about. He does it with the feeding of the multitudes, which incidentally is the only miracle Jesus did that is recorded in all four of the Gospels. And so there comes this day when they're all out in the desert and the people are weak. The disciples come to Jesus and say, "This is a desert place." Duh. This is a desert place. The people need to be fed. And Jesus says, "You feed them." And they say, "We couldn't feed them even if we had lots of money. And by the time we went to the store, we can't feed them." And you remember they bring the loaves and the fishes. And Jesus begins to explain himself to the disciples. First, the bread will be broken. I wish I had a big loaf here. I've done this in my church. I bought the most beautiful loaf I could at the bakery and just ripped it apart, and dropped the stuff on the floor. First thing, the bread is to be broken. Second thing, Jesus is speaking about the bread of life. He has come to give life to people. He says, I am the living bread. And he expects us to eat of him, so the bread is to be broken. They want to understand that the bread is a symbol of the living Christ risen from the dead. And 3, they are to understand the abundance of God's grace. So Jesus begins to break the bread, and they are awestruck. The bread is multiplied. It is heaped into their hands. They give it to the people. The beard is stuck on their. The bread is stuck on their beards in crumbling crumbs. It is scattered all about. It is so absolutely abundant. It feeds thousands of people. And they go through and they pick up great baskets of the leftovers. And they're saying, what's this all about? So Jesus says, I want you to get in a boat and go to Bethsaida. Now, Bethsaida is the place near the lake where the blind received their sight. That's where Jesus healed the blind people. So I want you to go to Bethsaida. These confused men, they get into their, thank you. Thanks. Hold the thought. I'm afraid it's not going to help much, just clear your own throat. They're not going to go to Bethsaida at all. Instead, they're going to row to Gennesaret, different direction. And you remember that that's the place where the crazies were. They get into the boat and they row against the wind. That's what happens when you don't grasp the miracle of the loaves. You spend your life rowing against the wind, going to a crazy place. Well, Jesus decided to take them over the same ground a second time. in the Gospel of Mark. They're out in the desert again, and he breaks the bread symbolic of his body. He gives them the bread of life. They take hunks and masses of this bread out to the people. It is grace, totally abundant, unlimited. The bread is heaped in their hands. It's stuck to their beards. It's all over the ground. They pick it up, baskets full of it. Can you believe it? They don't get the point. Grace is not easy for a sinner to grasp. And so in Mark chapter 8, Jesus forthrightly confronts them. He says, "Do you still not see or understand?" This is Mark 8:17 and on. "Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears that fail to hear? And don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls did you pick up?" 12, they replied. "And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" They answered, 7. He said to them, "Do you still not understand?" What does it take for people to embrace the grace of God and to do so without reservation? You know, there are people who believe not in righteousness by faith, but in righteousness by reservation. And so they leave the place with their blindness, and Mark exposes them. Here is what happens. I need to find my page. The disciples take a total spiritual nosedive, as has seldom been seen on this planet. First thing